שלום לכולם, רוצים להתחיל? ברוכים הבאים. Welcome everybody to this week's bi-weekly seminar. Today we're going to hear an interesting presentation. Professor Sternfeld or Sternfeld, but in English it dropped the H. Last week we had, it's a fitting presentation for the time. Last week we celebrated International Women's Day, and it's a briefing for the Jewish holiday of Purim, which happened in Iran. So, which is also a women's story. As an archaeologist, I'll represent that part, and that's all we'll say about it today. We'll move on to more modern periods. Professor Sternfeld is currently teaching at Penn State University. He had other teaching positions at Dartmouth and at University of Texas at Austin. He is a former graduate. He is a graduate of an MA and BA at Ben-Gurion University in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies. So we're happy to have him back. He has published a book between Iran and Zion, Jewish Histories of the 20th Century in Iran. We're talking about Jewish involvement. Today, the Iranian Jewish community has shrunk to a quarter of its size, maybe from less than a quarter of what it was. And what seems like a community at the fringe was very involved in the politics and in the framing of during the 1950s and 60s in Iran. He is here on sabbatical, if I got it right, working on another book, The Origins of Third Worldism in the Middle East. So he is here on sabbatical research here. Okay, which we think of Jewish communities in the diaspora outside Israel, but I guess the Iranian diaspora would be Iranians outside of Iran. So without further ado, we're here to hear the struggle of Jewish Iranian women's rights and inheritance in the 1970s. We'll hold questions at the end. For all the virtual participants, hello. You can type and I will answer, forward your question.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, as always. So I just want to preface and say that this research it came out of an article that I worked with Professor Janet Afari of UC Santa Barbara. This is our mutual project, and I just want to put there that it's a mutual project. Before we get to the story of the struggle of the Iranian Jewish women, I want to say something about the struggle of Iranian women for rights. This is something that was in the public debate in Iran from the constitutional revolution of the early 20th century. In the constitutional revolution, 1906, 1911, there was a strong movement of women's rights that even was supported by national publications and women's magazines that started to show up. Eventually, the discussion on women's rights was subsided because of national outside pressure and national tensions in the society. It's a matter of a different course. But the first time that Iranian women were given political rights was in the short-living independent Republic of Azerbaijan that was separated from Iran in 1945. It was an attempt to establish a Soviet republic on the Iranian Azerbaijan province. The republic existed for only a year, but during that year, women were granted full political rights, voting rights, right to be elected, and there was an attempt to push a very progressive legislation on women's rights. However, when the republic was dismantled in 1946 and Azerbaijan province returned to Iran, they walked back the privileges and rights that were given. The next time that women's rights were at the fore was during the period of Mohammad Mossadegh as prime minister, 1951 to 1953. Mossadegh, for those of you who don't know, he was the last democratically elected prime minister in Iran. His coalition was very broad, but it leaned on the communist Tudeh party. And the Tudeh party was a party that it wasn't communist in the way that we think of communist parties. It was social democrat. It was party of minorities. In the intelligence reports of the British, they called it the Jewish Armenian party, because there was large contingency of Jews and Armenians in the leadership of the party and the membership. And they also pushed for women's rights from practical point of view, that they needed the participation of women in the movement. And there was a stage in which they almost reached the ability to pass in the Majlis voting rights for women, but it failed with the August 1953 coup against Mossadegh that was executed by the CIA and the MI6, and it buried women's rights in Iran for another decade. In the 1960s, we saw the most consistent effort to push for women's rights in Iran. And this was thanks to pressure from the Kennedy administration in the US. Kennedy decided to change the way in which the US embraces allies. And it added another aspect of human and civil rights as part of the package of American support. It wasn't implemented equally across the board. But in places that the Kennedy administration felt there was more of room push, they pushed, and one of the places that they felt the alliance was strong enough in order to push it was Iran. And it made the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, that came to power in 1941, it made the Shah embark on this rapid modernization project that he called the White Revolution. It was called the White Revolution because it was not red, i.e. not communist, but also peaceful, not without bloodshed. And this was the White Revolution. At the end of the White Revolution, the Shah envisaged Iran to be the 5th largest economy in the world. He thought that there was a major component of land distribution, agricultural reform, industrial reform. So basically distributing wealth from the upper class to factories where actually factory owners were forced to give 25% of the ownership to the unions. And there were many aspects of it. But the Shah decided also to put women's rights at the front of the White Revolution because the unsaid part of the White Revolution was that it meant to turn Iran more Western. And Western meant for the Shah many things, but mostly women in ministers. And he wanted to see more women in the public service, in the public sphere, which was sort of a project that his father, Reza Khan, started in the 1920s that meant to bring women to more prominent positions in the public sphere. At the same time, we're seeing an incredible development, transformation of the Jewish Iranian community. If in the 1940s, we saw the Iranian Jewish community as a community of mostly 80% of them were in the lower classes, impoverished classes, the rural and the social periphery of Iran. In the 1960s, they were already at the peak of unprecedented upward mobility. I'll give you the raw numbers that in 1941, the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, the Jewish aid organization, came to work in Iran actually to support Polish refugees of World War II. But they decided to survey the Iranian Jewish community, and they found that there were about 100,000 Jews in Iran. 10% of them were among the country's elites. 10% were the country's emerging middle class, and 80% were impoverished lower classes. In 1977, we have multiple reports from the JDC, from the Alliance Israélite Universelle, and other Jewish organizations. We still had 100,000 people in Iran. This time, 80% of them were in the middle and upper middle classes. And this is on the span of less than 4 decades. So the immigration to Israel in the 1950s were of the lowest, the poorest Jews. So it just their mere living helped to push, helped to push the community upward. But there was also, they were very well positioned for the modernization project of the 1950s and 60s, and they took advantage of it. And some of, I can talk about it later because this is from my new project, that many of the Jews who came to Israel in the 1950s returned to Iran on working for Israeli companies and consortia, and they came back as site managers, project managers, and used it actually as a vehicle for upward mobility in Iran. So it's another story. Yeah, so it was very much in opposition to the Iranian clergy. First of all, because clerics held many lands, and land distribution was threatening. There were other struggles. Women's rights was one of the things that that actually united Muslim and Jewish clergy in opposition to the White Revolution. So in that period, we see this. I don't know if you saw recent photos of synagogues in Iran. You probably saw the synagogue in Yusufabad neighborhood, Sukkot Shalom, which is the synagogue that was built in 1967 in that period. And this is the symbol of the period because this is when the Jews left the old neighborhoods in central and southern Tehran and moved to the newer neighborhoods in the north. And this is a symbol for their success of integration and becoming part of the Iranian nation building project. And but there was also this social transformation also increased anxiety of assimilation, of mixed marriages, and the ramification of these anxieties were on display with the very harsh discussion among Jews regarding women's rights. Jewish women found themselves in disadvantage compared to non-Jewish Iranians. There was this attempt to, and this was a generational struggle as well. There was this attempt to hide the Jewish women from the public sphere. In the period in which Iranian women were encouraged to be at the front, Iranian Jewish women were encouraged to marry very early, at very early age. They were discouraged from participating in sport events, in the music scene. It was very much, it was predominantly Jewish and Armenian, and women and Jewish women were discouraged from participating in that, and a good Iranian Jewish woman should start a family at early age and help to develop to support the Jewish family and the Jewish community. There was also, and this is something that we see from multiple accounts in literature, but also anthropological research by Saba Somech and Janet Afari, that we see that Iranian Jewish women were actually, they were asked to blur their beauty, to not beautify themselves. It was considered to be like obscene to look pretty, and this was something that was very like it was something that ran. It was obvious that in the community, women must not beautify themselves. And in the mid 1960s, when the Iranian society was already feeling this transformation, the white revolution granted women rights to divorce, and it increased the number of divorces in Iran. There was this sentence that was repeatedly said in Jewish circles that they take pride in the very low number of divorce and polygamy. I should say that polygamy was practiced in Iran among Jews until late in the 20th century. And then two pieces of legislation really cemented the achievements of the women's rights struggle in Iran. And this was the Family Protection Law of 1967 and 1975. These were actually three different pieces of legislation that were put together, pushed by the Shah and mostly his sister, Ashraf Pahlavi, that was the head of the Iranian women organization. As I said, it allowed women to initiate divorce. It gave women the veto right on the husband taking second and third wives. And it united the Jewish and Muslim clergy in opposition to the legislation. It also gave women in Iran equal share of inheritance, which was also something that enraged the religious circles. The Jewish Women Organization in Iran was established by Shamsi Hekmat and Maliheh Kashfi. Both of them were very prominent women in the Jewish community. Here we see them with the chief rabbi of Iran, Chacham Yedidia Shofet. They started the welfare projects for women by building educational, vocational training institution, educational system for women, childcare. Maliheh Kashfi was the sister of a very prominent physician in Iran and the wife of Jamshid Kashfi, who was the Jewish representative in the Majlis. The part that was not publicly known was that she was the second wife of Jamshid Kashfi. She had co-wife. And this was part of her, she was the first wife actually, and this was part of her motivation to push the legislation to help to give women the veto right on taking second wife. Yeah, civil family matter courts. Yeah, so women could turn to the family courts, the state family courts, and be granted divorce and getting custody over kids, which was not custody over children was not something that that traditionally was given to women. This is I'm getting to it. I'm getting there. Yeah. No, wait. There are many surprises in my sleeve. Wait. So they were both very respected activists in the community and worked for decades to the benefit of Jewish women in Iran and also Iranian women at large. Shamsi Hekmat was the vice president of the Iranian Women Organization, non-Jewish organization. So she was very well respected. Now, okay, let me say, because Daniela asked, this is something that I'll get to later, but the Jewish community asked to be exempted from the family protection law. The rabbinical leadership of Iran asked to exempt the Jewish community because it stands in contradiction to the Jewish law, and therefore family matters, including inheritance, should remain in the hands of the Jewish courts. Now, something that I didn't know when I started working on it was that Israel didn't have equal inheritance law until 1965. Only 1965, it started in 1961. Israel started the process of writing inheritance law that gave women equal share. Mapai actually opposed it. The parties that pushed for it were the Liberal Party and Herut. And Mafdal had a crucial role. Mafdal is the National Religious Party, had a crucial role in helping get some initial support from religious public figures. It didn't help much. It had to go through the Supreme Court Bagatz in 1965 to get the law approved. But then the Iranian Jewish women said, wait, so Muslim women in Iran get all the rights and equal part of the inheritance. Women in Israel got all the rights and equal inheritance, and we don't get anything because this is the Jewish tradition. And then they started fighting for transforming the power structure of the Jewish community. In 1964, Iran hosted the International Congress of Women Organizations. The Congress was presided by Ashraf Pahlavi, the Shah's sister. And there was and Chava Cohen, who was the head of the Bitzo in Israel, represented the Israeli organizations in the conference. And then she met with Hekmat and Kashfi, two leaders of the Iranian Jewish organization. And they talked about the situation of the Iranian Jewish women. Chava Cohen was not very surprised, but she was surprised at the level of opposition that the rabbinical leadership presented. And she went back because Israel was on the verge of getting the law passed. She went back to Israel and she talked with Rachel Shazar, the wife of President Shazar. And she was also a strong advocate for women's rights. She tried to get the chief rabbis in Israel involved, and they wanted to stay out. And then she turned to the office of the chief Chacham for the communities of Sfarad and Portugal, Spain and Portugal, in London, and and they figured that he will be more supportive, and his religious authority was much stronger than we imagine today. And he issued a letter of support in the Iranian women's appeal. They started to work with Jewish women organizations around the world, and turned it into an international story. Eventually, in 1966, Chief Sephardi Rabbi Yitzhak Nissim agreed to step in, because again he had to agree to the passing of the law in Israel, so he felt compelled to help this appeal of Iranian women. It resulted, so Yitzhak Nissim came to Tehran for a few weeks with few officials from the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Israel, and another Mizrahi rabbi, Shlomo Yeluz. He went with Zerach Veratig from Mafdal, and they forced the Iranian rabbis to meet with the Jewish women and try to find a proper solution. On March 10th, 1966, they came up with this agreement that was called the Tasrib Nameh, which the Iranian Jewish leadership presented as a major breakthrough, as an achievement for women. And it was much better than the situation when it started. It gave women half of the share of the son in inheritance. The agreement is very detailed in like the different scenarios. So if the husband passed away, in the old tradition, the widow doesn't get anything. If she has sons, it's divided, the inheritance is divided by the sons, and they are obligated to support their mother. Now, women in the family, mother, daughter, they get half of the share of the sons. Despite the push, the Tasrib Nameh did not forbid polygamy, and it further limited the ability of women to initiate divorce, because it said, okay, if we're going all the way to give you half of the share of the inheritance, it means that we have to stick to the language of the Ketubah as is. This is where you compromise. And it made easier for men to initiate divorce and leave the women without anything. So, for example, something that we see in that period is that a man could initiate divorce by saying that he heard that his wife went to a non-kosher butchery. Therefore, she left the Jewish community. She bought meat so she failed him, and she can no longer be considered part of the Jewish community. This was the reason for it. Hanging out with non-Jewish friends could lead to speculation about the nature of relations, and these were all were taken as reasonable. Yeah. Rabbi Shlomo Yeluz, that was part of Yitzhak Nissim's delegation in 1966, decided to stay in Tehran a bit longer, and he established a new Bet Din. He invited the chief rabbi, Chacham Yedidia Shofet, to join him in heading the new Bet Din. Chacham Uriel Davidi, who was really quite a personality in the scene of Iranian Jewish rabbis. He was one of the strongest champions of women's rights in Iran as a religious leader. He was also part of the revolutionary circles in the 1970s. And he joined the Bet Din as well. And seeing Yedidya Shofet, who was, the most important religious figure in Iran for the Jews, sitting with Yeloz and Davidi, made the other rabbis in Iran question the legitimacy of the entire religious establishment in Iran, the Jewish religious establishment. And they basically said that, look, in 1966, women that wanted to initiate divorce, be them if they're Jewish or not, they can go to the civil court, to the state courts, and get the state divorce. But it also meant expulsion from the. And this is the tool that the opposition, that the conservative, the Jewish community used in order to shut this door for Iranian. There was another thing that we start seeing in the 1960s was that it wasn't, it wasn't in large numbers, but women in time for getting the inheritance decided to convert to Islam. And then they had to get the largest part of the inheritance. So it happened not on large scale, but enough to make the community worried. Now, this is the time when the Iranian Jewish leaders start to think that maybe we should find a solution before it becomes the obvious tool of women to get the rights, to go to state courts or to convert to Islam and get a larger share. Yeah, this is when they start seeing the trend. Everything was very new, so it's pretty much anecdotally, but it's enough to get the attention to those cases of conversion and going to state court. And one of the cases that were important in the formation of this, in getting the rabbinical leadership and the community behind some kind of move for greater rights, was a divorce case in 1976 that it was after much abuse. It was there was physical abuse, sexual abuse, and the woman decided that she's not staying in this marriage, and she went to the state courts. And then her father, who was one of the dignitaries of the community, and he was a personal friend with Yedidya Shofet, he said, look, we already have the papers from the state court. I wanted to give her the Jewish divorce. He said, even if you cut my two hands, I cannot issue that. We cannot change a 1,000-year tradition. And then for the Iranian Jewish women organization, this showed that with this leadership we're not getting anywhere, and they went to in 1976. They invited the new Rishon LeZion, Ovadia Yosef, to intervene, and Ovadia Yosef was very much interested in resolving this issue. He moved to Tehran for 3 months. Rabbi Yeloz in 1966 established a new Bet Din next to the old Bet Din. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef announced that the old Bet Din is no longer relevant, it doesn't have any authority, and he established a new Bet Din and asked to bring to him all the cases of inheritance, of divorce, and he wanted to resolve all of them. And in 1976, he came up with he managed to broker a new agreement that gave women equal rights, in inheritance, equal rights in family matters. He approved changing the wording of the ketubah in order to reflect greater autonomy for women and more rights for the women. And this is the photo of from the day of signing the agreement. All these achievements, of course, were short-lived as well, because 2 years later, the revolution started. Women's rights, the family protection law was one of the first laws to be reversed by the revolutionary government. The family protection, the struggle for women's rights. There's actually a very interesting episode. You mentioned the International Women's Day that happened on March 8th. On March 8, 1979, a month after the arrival of Khomeini to Iran, he suggested in an interview that veil will become mandatory at some point. And veiling was very much discouraged by the Shah's government. There are many books that were written about it. So part of the anti-Shah demonstrations were for the right to wear veil. And on March 8, 1979, after Khomeini said it, million people, men and women, took to the street to protest the intention to make veiling mandatory. Women that struggled against the Shah in order to put veil took to the streets now to remove the veil. Men wore veils in order to ridicule the intent to make it mandatory. And Khomeini, that was shocked by this response, announced that veil will remain recommended and not mandatory, and will take another 4 years before veiling became part of the state law. I'll finish here so we can have some kind of discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. So this is a very interesting way to think about it, but the relations between the Jewish community in Iran and Israel is something that I wrote an entire book about, and it's very complicated. I think that what pushed the Iranian Jewish women to get the support of the chief rabbi in Israel was the fact that the chief rabbi of Iran said, this is our tradition, I cannot change it. When they see, the state, the society in which they live, and if we didn't see the family protection law of 1965 taking place, we probably wouldn't have seen the training to the Israeli authorities in order to the Israeli rabbis in order to. But I said, look, Iranian Muslim women get all those rights. Our rabbis say that we cannot get these rights because of the Jewish tradition. But Israel was able to get this law passed with the agreement of the rabbinic leadership. So it was an attempt to tackle Iranian rabbinic leadership, and none of them looked for pathways to connect with the Jewish with the rabbinic leadership in Israel. Yeah, it was the chief rabbi in Iran said we cannot do it because of the chief rabbi of Israel just approved it. Yeah, and they did it not because they wanted to develop stronger attachment to Israel. They did it because they wanted to get more rights in Iran. This was the reference point, right? They wanted to get more rights in Iran. And the way to do it was to get to the Chacham and to get to the Rishon LeZion and to get to all those places, because just in order to handle the rabbinic leadership in Iran. The way that it was seen by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and by Kahana and others, it's a different story. They saw it as a Jewish and Israeli mission. But for the Iranian Jewish women, it's about their rights in Iran. Yeah, so the first Beddin, when in 1966, when they got to this agreement, they believed that they solved the problem, but then they realized it was not nearly enough, and then we waited another decade to see the mission led by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. I think that an interesting thing about, thank you for the comment and question. I think that the interesting, the beautiful thing about Rabbi Ovadia is that he's a man of many contradictions. In different parts of his career, he was championing women's rights, and we know the support for the peace process and everything, and then he reversed everything. I think that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and this is something that we can see from his notes, is that he just thought that it wasn't fair that women in Israel got these rights, and women in Iran don't get those rights for ostensibly from getting to the same source, right, that of the Jewish law. And I don't think that this case was some kind of progressive wishes of Ovadia Yosef. I think that it was just the practical matter that the law has to be applied equally. The halachic reasoning, there are pages and pages of halachic reasoning. I think that at the end of the day, he worked like a machine when he came to Tehran. He just took the pile of fields and files and just approved them all. I don't know if he used those words, but he was the person that was in charge of getting the agreement of 1976 that stated as much. His name is on the document as the head of Beddin, but not he didn't author the agreement. He was the spirit behind it. And you can see that even today, like every Iranian synagogue has a picture of Ovadia Yosef there because of the role that he played in 76. Go and learn all kinds of tools and stuff, so they can be superior on their husband. What is superior and what is not. The husband and say we know better. I agree. This is the story of the Iranian Jewish feminists that I don't know if they would call themselves feminists, but this is the story of the struggle of the Iranian Jewish women. And but I think that first of all, the episode of Ovadia Yosef in Iran is interesting, various aspects, but also because it came in that moment that the struggle he was there to win, to score the goal. And also, it's thinking in retrospect about Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is interesting, to see the trajectory of his ruling and reasoning and the reach of his authority. Because when he came, it was all the foundations were laid by the Iranian Jewish women, but he was there to seal it. And but right, it's the story of the women.
בטבעי, אני מקיים את התקופה שלנו, את הרבנית, שבה הם תעברו את המעמדה,
ברגע שהוא בא, הסמכות שלו בתור הראשון לציון, למרות שזה מדינה אחרת. הוא לא היה גם הדין בהתייחסות שלו לרבנים המקומיים. הם לא יכלו, לא היה להם, הוא לא היה להם, ברגע שהוא בא, לא הייתה להם שום פוליטית. כן, הוא למד פרסית, כולם אמרו את זה, לא למד ברמה של שליטה וזה, אבל הוא למד פרסית מספיק בשביל להתנהל מולם. זה שהוא היה עיראקי, כיהן כרב במצרים, כיהן כרב בישראל, והוא היה הראשון לציון, זה היה מספיק בשביל לקעקע את ההתנגדות מתוך העיר. גם אני אגיד, גם ב-76, לא היה לי זמן להתעכב על זה, אבל ב-76 בקואליציה שהייתה מאחורי האנשים, הייתה הרבה יותר. גם ג'משיד קשפי שהיה נציג בפרלמנט, שהוא הבעל של מליחי קשפי, ועם co-wife וזה, גם הוא בסוף יצא מאוד תומך, כאילו, וגם עוד פוליטיקאי יהודי שהיה חבר מועצת העיר טהרן באותו זמן, ברח לי השם שלו, גם הוא היה מאוד דחף לזה. כלומר, זה לא שהרב עובדיה הגיע ומולו רק אופוזיציה, הוא הגיע וכבר יש דיגניטריז יהודים שמחכים לתת לו גב אל מול ההנהגה הרבנית של הרב שופט. אז הוא בא, עוד פעם, הוא בא אל המוכן, הוא בא להבקיע פנדל, כאילו, זה כבר הכינו לו את הכל, רק תבוא ותפיל את זה. הם היו כלומר, של היהודים, וכתוב מאחוריה, ההנהגה היהודית חייבת להתקשר לפי ההנהגה. אם יש הנהגה פוליטית חזקה, ששם הממון, שם קמח. אם הייתה הנהגה פוליטית מאוחדת, בלי דרישות אנשים, כבר ב-60 שזה היה נגמר אולי, כנראה. אבל ב-76 זה כבר היה מצב. ב-76 כל ההנהגה, רוב ההנהגה הפוליטית, הייתה מובנת וזה שעובדיה עזר להם, כי על הפוליטה שלו וכבר, עוד פעם, הקהילה כבר הייתה, ב-76, הקהילה כבר הייתה מובנת לזה. הקהילה רצתה את זה כבר הרבה ב-66. בגלל כל החרדות האלה של אנשים שהתאסלמו בשביל לקבל, עוד פעם, זה אנקדוטות, אבל אלה דברים שנוכחים בדיונים. אז אני אגיד ב-81, רבות מהן עזבו ללוס אנג'לס, והקימו שם את ארגון הנשים היהודיות האיראנית של דרום קליפורניה, ושזה היום אחד בארגון צ'ריטי ממש גדול, כאילו, והן עדיין נחשבות לדמויות מרכזיות בכינונה של הקהילה האיראנית בארצות הברית, שהן אולטרה שמרניות, אבל הן הצליחו להעביר הרבה מהכוח שלהם בתוך הקהילה מטהרן ללוס אנג'לס.
two different beliefs. Rabbinic, you would not define the rabbinic as a political leadership.
No, not in 1970, not in the 60s. They were more important until the 50s, and they were much more important after 79. But in the 60s and 70s, we have two heads of the community, the rabbinical and the political. Most of the time, the political haven't confronted the rabbinical. Yeah, it's an elected, it's an elected leadership. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but also again, they didn't have any interest in checking the book until it was possible, to ignore the of the Iranian that became the grievances of. Look, in 1976, it's not part of the chronology of the revolution, but the revolutionary movement is already playing a big role in the public life in Iran, and part of it was human rights, civil rights, women's rights. So in 1976, different public conversation taking place, right? It's not an introduction, but the introduction discussion is impacted by the general conversation.
Going to don't relate this so that you found that these women went to those
Yeah.
it also happens sometimes. Can you say more about that?
It was so the choice, women could go, nobody would stop them from going to the state court, but the price of it would be social, what? Yeah. They were no longer part of the Jewish community. And if they had children after being remarried, legally, the state would recognize their, but their kids would not be, right? They will not be considered part of the Jewish community ever. So the participation of two important public figures in the Jewish community in this way gave very small glimpse into this affair from the outside. But generally, the Iranian public did have much more important issues at hand at the time. And the divorce cases of the Jewish community was not one of the concerning issues. Yeah. על המחקר הנוכחי. Yeah, so I'm here on sabbatical to work on my research on the Iranian Jewish communities, the Iranian Jewish diaspora in Israel and the US. So as I said, my first book was looking at the Iranian Jewish community in Iran, and my book more or less ended in the mid-1980s after the revolution and the post-revolution. And this project emerged from my from various book talks that I gave in the US, and people came to me and wanted to tell me the story of what happened later. And at first, look, for my first book, it took me ages to convince people to talk, because I'm not Iranian, and because the Iranian Jewish community in the US is a very interesting one in terms of dynamics in the community and the community outside. And I was just overwhelmed by the responses after the book came out, that people wanted me and I said, oh, if someone's coming to me, I'm listening. And I started accumulating many accounts, and I figured that I should continue. The natural continuation of my book would be to see what happened with the three branches of the community after the revolution. One branch is the one that stayed in Iran until today. The second branch is the one that came to Israel. And the third branch, which is today the biggest of them, is the community that moved to the US. So the story of the Iranian Jewish community that stayed in Iran after the revolution, I just published last summer an article on which I worked for too long. And it's the story of the Iranian Jewish community from pretty much 79 to today. The Israeli and the American communities are fascinating because they developed in two opposite directions in unimaginable ways. The community in Israel, most of it came in 1948 to 1951. So there was earlier wave of migration in the 1910s and 20s. There was from 1953 to 1975, there was almost virtually no immigration to Israel from Iran. And then in 1979, the vast majority of Jews moved to Los Angeles. And we're talking about over 60% that moved to Los Angeles and about 20% that moved to Israel. And the two communities developed in profoundly different ways. And this is something that I wanted to study. And the story of the Iranian Jewish community in Los Angeles today is mind-blowing in many ways, because in the American context, it's a unique of migration that came as with capital. It's not the classic American, I came with $20 bill in my pocket and built myself. They came and they almost immediately turned Beverly Hills to Persian, to the extent that Beverly Hills, the city of Beverly Hills, changed the aesthetic code of the city to prevent the Iranian Jews from changing the facade of the houses, of the streets. There was a very strong anti-Iranian sentiment in 1979 in Los Angeles. There were demonstrations and hate crimes against Iranians because of the hostage crisis. The beginning of the 24-hour news cycle, as we know today, goes back to that. So it changed the American society in various ways. And the community, so as an antidote to the anti-Iranian sentiment, we see the emergence of the Persian identity, which is not an identity that existed in Iran at all. But this was, I'm not Iranian. I'm not the Iranians that you see on TV. I'm Persian. I go back to, yeah. So, and it really changed the way that the community behaved and the kind of invisible walls that they built around themselves. And politically, it is known as a very conservative community politically. It's the red, in Los Angeles, they call it the red state of Westwood. Westwood is the main street of the Jewish district. It's called Tehrangeles. On Google Maps, if you look Tehrangeles, it will take you to Westwood Boulevard. And it's known as the red state of Westwood because they vote Republican almost no matter what. And it's in contradiction not just to Los Angeles, but also to the Jewish community, to the non-Iranian Jewish community that is overwhelmingly democratic. And one of the interesting, cases to examine is the attitude towards the nuclear agreement among Iranian Jews in Los Angeles and Iranian Jews in Israel. In Israel, the community overwhelmingly supported the nuclear agreement, despite being part of the right-wing voters, and despite being, for them, this was, and I think that the circumstances under which the community left shaped the way that they think of Iran today. So the Iranian Jews in Israel did not flee Iran. They had various reasons to immigrate, religious, national, whatever, but they didn't flee Iran. The Iranian Jews in LA think of themselves as refugees. And there are very few parallel samples. But I think that the closest community with a similar trajectory is the Cuban Jewish community that came in Miami, that also came after the revolution. By the way, a bit longer after. I mean, they spent more time in Cuba after the revolution than Iranian Jews did, but they became very loyal Republican voters and very much opposed to the Jewish community around them, the non-Cuban Jewish community around them, and the perception of American might and Cuban or Iranian nationalism. This is something that I'm working on now. Right. Right.
And in Europe, for example, some people that mother language, but Arabic
there was a very large Iraqi Jewish community in Iran, and many of them, Alfi family in Israel, they are Alfi. They are Iraqi Jews that moved to Iran, and the main square in Abadan until today is called Maidan Alfi, after their department store that was there. The community that moved from Tehran to Los Angeles in 1970 is one generation removed from the provinces. They all moved to Tehran, and not all of them, but many of them moved to Tehran in the 50s. When they left the provinces, to Tehran, for Tehran. When those who came here left for Israel, they left provinces to Tehran, for Tehran. So, but their social economic status was walled apart from the one that previous generations had in the provinces in Iran, right? So many of them are from Tehran, but not originally from Tehran. Yeah. So many of the Kurds and Arabs in the Jewish community in Los Angeles became Persian. As part of the Persian identity, it was easier for them to adopt this Persian identity than to start, explaining even to themselves. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you still have a gathering of the Golai Paigan community, and yeah, Burujard, yeah. There are synagogues in Jerusalem. There are synagogues to every community. Yeah, Yeah. Historian. I use other, yeah, I use oral history, not as a, I use oral history, but this is not my main pillar. I use oral history as a way to get also links to other historical sources. So I explained in my first group that I went through too many methodological articles of, on oral history, and I had to find, so as someone who cannot conduct research in Iran, I had to find the best way to get to sources. So I could hire researchers, but I had to direct them to what to find. And the way for me to get better sense of where to guide them to was through the home history. So if someone told me in March 1966, in this application, they quoted me saying that, I asked the research assistants to find the publication in the Kitab Nameh, in the National Library. So, and again, I use oral history. I find it fascinating. I get information that I couldn't find anywhere. But this is, but if I cannot support it with other historical sources, I almost never bring it to the final thing. No, it's a good question. I think that my affiliation with an American university gives the needed protection. Yeah, this is the best I can do. Like, I make sure that, like, I never write their name publicly, and so yeah, students, work side on side.